You good? Okay.
Testing.
Boker Tov, Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to our morning Shacharit service. We take a collective deep breath ready for Shabbat morning, a rest from all of the stresses, all of the work to do at the other 6 days. We begin our Shacharit service with Moda Ani on page 186.
Moda Ani lefanecha ruach chai vekayam. Moda Ani lefanecha ruach chai vekayam shechazarta binishmati bechemla rabba emunatecha shechazarta binishmati bechemla rabba emunatecha.
The words of Matovu from this week's Torah portion, from the curse of Bilam, that when he saw the Jewish nation, he couldn't help himself but giving them a blessing that we value so much so we put it at the beginning of our service. Matovu aholacha Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael. How fair, how beautiful is your community, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel. We turn to page 194 for the blessing of Asher Yatzar, thanking God that our bodies in their intricate makeup function the way they do. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher yatzar et ha'adam bechachma uvrei bo nekavim nekavim chalolim chalolihim galoi b'yado lefnei kisei kvodacha she'im yiftach echad mehem o yistam echad mehem אי אפשר להתקיים עולמו לפניך, ברוך אתה אדוני, רופא כל בשר ומפליא לעשות. We turn the page to 196 for Elohai Neshama.
אלוהי נשמה שנתת בי טהוראי, אלוהי נשמה שנתת בי טהוראי, אלוהי נשמה שנתת בי טהורה, טהוראי, אלוהי נשמה שנתת בי טהוראי, אלוהי נשמה שנתת בי טהוראי, אלוהי נשמה שנתת בי טהורה, טהוראי.
Baruch atah Adonai asher b'yado nefesh kol chai v'ruach kol basar ish. We turn the page for 198 for the blessings of the daily miracles. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has given the mind the ability to distinguish day from night.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who opens the eyes of the blind.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who frees the captive.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who lifts up the fallen.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who stretches the earth over the waters.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who strengthens our steps.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who clothes the naked.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who gives strength to the weary.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who removes sleep from the eyes, slumber from the eyelids.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who made me in the image of God.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me free.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me a Jew.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who girds Israel with strength.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who crowns Israel with splendor.
Amen. In keeping with the tradition that each and every day is a new opportunity to learn more about the Torah, ourselves, our community, and the world, we recite the blessing for the Torah on 204. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. O Adonai our God, let the words of Torah be sweet in our mouths and the mouths of your people Israel, so that we, our descendants and the descendants of all your people Israel, may know you by studying your Torah for its own sake. Baruch atah Adonai hamelamed Torah li'amo Yisrael. We continue on page 206. These are the things that are limitless, of which a person enjoys the fruit of the world, while the principle remains in the world to come. They are honoring one's parents, engaging in deeds of compassion, arriving early for study morning and evening, dealing graciously with guests, visiting the sick, providing for the wedding couple, accompanying the bed for burial, being devoted in prayer and making peace among all people. But the study of Torah encompasses them all. We turn to page 212 for Baruch Shamar.
Baruch Shemar ve'aya Baruch Hu, Baruch Shemo, Baruch Oseh Bereshit, Baruch Omer Ve'oseh, Baruch Gozer Umekayem, Baruch Merachem al haaretz, Baruch Merachem al habriot, Baruch Meshalem Sachatov Liryav, Baruch Achai Layad V'Kayach, Baruch Podeh Umatzil, Baruch Hu, Baruch Shemo, Yadadai-dai-dai-dai, Ladadai-dai-dai-dai, Dadadai-dai-dai, Yadadai-dai-dai-dai, Dadadai-dai-dai-dai, Yadadai-dai-dai, Yalalai-lai-lai,
Baruch atah Adonai melech me'olam b'tishbachat. We turn to 214 for Mizmor Shir.
Mizmor, Mizmor Shir, Shir Yom HaShabbat. 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 Mizmor Shir, Shir Yom HaShabbat.
Page 215 for Ashrei.
Sela Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, Od Yehallelukha Sela Ashrei, Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, Od Yehallelukha Sela Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, Od Yehallelukha Sela Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, Od Yehallelukha Sela Ashrei, Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, Od Yehallelukha Sela.
Tehillat lelavi alay melech v'Hashemcha le'olam va'ed.
בכל יום ארבעך ולשמך לעולם ועד.
גדול אדוני מעולם מאוד, גליתולתו אין חקר.
דור לדור ישפך מעשיך וגבורתך יגידו.
הדר כבוד הודך ודיב נפתך עשיך.
ועזוז נורתך יאמרו גלתך ספרנה.
זכר רב טובך יביעו וצדקך ירננו.
חנון ורחום אדוני ערך אפיים וגדל חסד.
טוב אדוני לעכו ורחמיו על כל מעשיו.
יודוך אדוני בכל מעשיך וחסידיך יברכוך.
כבוד מלכותך יאמרו וגבורתך ידברו.
להודיע לבני אדם גבורתיו וכבוד הדר מלכותו.
מלכותך מלכות כל עולמים ומשלתך בכל דור ודור.
סומך אדוני לכל הנופלים וזוקף לכל הכפופים.
הנה כה אליך יסברו ואתה נותן להם את החלם בעיתו.
פותח את ידיך ומסביר לכל רצון.
צדיק אדוני בכל דרכיו וחסיד בכל מעשיו.
קרוב אדוני לכל קוריו, לכל אשר יקראו באמת.
רצון יראיו יעשה ואת שבתם ישמע ויושיעם.
שומר אדוני את כל אוהביו ואת כל הראשים ישמיע.
תהילת אדוני ידבר פיו ויברך כל בשר שם קדשו לעולם ועד.
ואנחנו נברך יה מעתה ועד עולם. הללויה.
We turn for Hallelujah on 218.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah. כל הנשמה
נשמת כל חי תברך את שמך אדוני אלוהינו ורוח כל בשר תבער בתיאורים זכריך מלכנו תמיד מן העולם ועד עולם אתה אין לנו מלך אלא אתה אלוהי ראשונים ואחרונים אלוהי כל בריות אדון כל הדעות המעולל ברוב תשבחות המנהג עולמו בחסד בריותיו ברחמים ואדוני לא ינום ולא ישן המאר ישנים ומקיץ נרדמים והמשיח ילווים והמתיר אסורים והשמח נופלים והזוקק כפופים לך לבדך אנחנו מודיעים. We turn to 220 for Ilufinu.
Ilufinu מלא שירת קיים לא לשוננו רינה וידינו פרוסות כנשרי שמיים ורגלינו קלות כאיילות. אילופינו מלא שירה קיים ולשוננו רינה וידינו פרוסות כנשרי שמיים ורגלינו קלות כאיילות. כנשרי שמיים ורגלינו קלות כאיילות.
האל בתתומות עוזך, הגדול בכבוד שמך, הגיבור לנצח ונורא בנורתך, המלך היושב על כיסא רם ונישא. We continue with Shochenad in the middle of 222.
שוכנד מרום וקדוש שמו, וככתוב רננו צדיקים באדוני, לישרים נאווה תהילה, בפי ישרים תתהלל, ודברי צדיקים תתברך, ובלשון חסידים תתרומם, ובקרב קדושים תתקדש. ובמקלות רבבות עמך בית ישראל, ברינה מתפאר שמך מלכנו בכל דור ודור. ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו, האל המלך הגדול והקדוש בשמיים ובארץ, כי לך נאה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו, שירו ושבחה, הלל וזמרה, עוז וממשלה, נצח, גדולה וגבורה, תהילה ותפארת, קדושה ומלכות, ברכות והודאות, מעתה ועד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני אל ותשבחות, אל ההודות אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשירי זמרה, מלך מלכי העולמים. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועל מה דברה חירותי והמליך מלכותי, וחייכון יומכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל, בגלה בגלה ובזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעד לעולמיה, יתברך יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתהלל, ויתהלל שמי דקודשה, לילה בין כל מחתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה תמירון בעלמה ויאמרו
Amen. Please rise for Baruch Hu on 226. Be seated. We continue on page 228. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or bracha choseh shalom v'briyat hakoho hameir la'aretz uledilei areh brachamim uvtavod mechadesh l'choyam timin ma'aseh shehid marabu masach Adonai kulam b'chachma asita mela'aretz kinyanecha titbarach Adonai Eloheinu al shafach maseh yadecha ve'al merei or she'asita yivaruch hasela or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir v'nizke kelanu meherei le'orot Baruch atah Adonai Yotzer HaMeorot. We turn to page 230, and before we recite Ahava Rabbah, this chapter of deep love, we take a collective deep breath and meditate on this idea of love, acknowledging the fact that there's so much hate, and hate is so much more easy to conjure up for those around us, especially those we don't know, than love, and what our world would look like if we can tap into the infinite power of love just a little bit more each and every week. Ahava rabba aftanu Adonai Eloheinu chem lagadola v'yeterachem lata aleinu ba'avor avotenu v'imatenu Shabbat becha v'tamidem chukei chayim ken techanenu utamidenu hamerachem rachem aleinu v'tem b'libenu lahavinu l'haskil lishmoa lilmod ulilamed ulashmor ulasod ulakayem et kol divrei Talmud Toratecha b'ahavaha. Enlighten our eyes with your Torah, focus our minds on your mitzvot, unite our hearts in love and reverence for your name. Then we will never feel shame, never deserve rebuke, and never stumble. Having trusted in your great and awesome holiness, we shall celebrate your salvation with joy. Gather us in peace from the four corners of the earth and lead us upright to our land. For you, O God, work wonders. You chose us. Truly, you drew us near to your great name, that we might acknowledge you, declaring you one in love. Baruch atah Adonai habocher ba'amo Yisrael b'yahava. We turn to page 232 for Shema.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Adonai Elohecha bechol levavcha ubechol nafshecha ubechol meodecha vehayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha veshinantam levanecha ודיברת בם, ושבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשכבך ובקומך, ושרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך, ובישעריך. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם
Adonai Elohechem emet v'yatzi v'ahu v'chavi v'nora v'adir v'tov v'yafar hadavar zeh aleinu li'olam va'ed. From Egypt you redeemed us, freeing us from bondage. For that your beloved sang praise, exalting you. Your dear ones offered hymns, songs, praise, blessings, and thanksgivings to you as sovereign, the living and enduring God. High and exalted, great and awesome, God ever humbles the proud, raises the lowly, frees the imprisoned, redeems the afflicted, helps the oppressed, answering our people when we cry out. Praise to God Most High, blessed is God and deserving of our praises. In great joy, Moses, Miriam, and Israel responded with song to you, all of them proclaiming. Mi chamocha on page 240.
Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha neder HaKodesh, mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha neder HaKodesh, Nora tehilot Osef ele, Nora tehilot Osef ele, Shira chadasha, shibchu geulim, Leshimcha al sefat hayam, Shira chadasha, shibchu geulim, Leshimcha al sefat hayam. ישראל, ותקומך יהודה וישראל. עלינו, אדוני צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל.
ברוך אתה אדוני
גם
ישראל.
אדוני שפתי תפתח ופי יגיד תהילתך. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avoteinu ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor ve'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, ve'Koneh Hakol, ve'Zocher Chasdei Avot ve'Imahot, u'mevii Goel לפני בניהם למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומשיח ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ובעזרת שרה.
אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיה מתים אתה, רב להושיע. מוריד הטל, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיה מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומציר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני יפה. עמוך בעד גבורות ומידו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים.
קדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שתשעים אותו בשם מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוא כל הארץ כבודו. אדיר אדירנו אדוני נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, בשפחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
ישמחו במלכותך שומרי שבת וקורא עונה.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל, ואמרו יושבי תבל, ואמרו אמן.
We turn to page 362 and rise for the removal of the Torah from the ark.
Elohim Adonai, ve'en k'ma'asecha, malchutecha malchut kol olamim, u'memshaltecha bechol dor v'ador. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, Adonai oz le'amo yiten, Adonai yevarech et amo b'shalom. Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah amo v'shalom. Ayos le'amo yiten. Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. You may be seated. Welcome to everybody joining us today in person, joining us on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. So in the late 19th century, there were two older Jewish men sitting at a coffee shop, and they both had newspapers in front of them. And the first man, you can imagine, sipping his coffee, reading the newspaper, and he has this petrified look on his face. And his friend, shocked that his friend is so gloomy, says, "What's wrong?" And his friend said, "What do you mean, what's wrong? Everything is terrible. Look around. The economy is collapsing. Around our city, anti-Semitism is increasing. And even in our own Jewish community, it's so hard to get young Jews involved in Jewish events. They're all going off and doing other things." "But wait a minute. You're also reading the news. How are you so happy?" "Well," his friend says, "it seems like you're reading the Jewish news. So of course it's filled with gloom. I'm reading the state-sponsored secular news, and it's great. It's filled with these optimistic ideas such as the Jews control the banks, the Jews control the media, and we control the world. Shlomo, this news is much better." So we open this Parsha, Parsha Balak, and the uncanny parallel to this joke is absolutely stunning. In our Torah portion, the Jewish nation is traveling along the desert, and they bump into a man named Balak, who is a king, and an anti-Semitic king at that. With echoes of Pharaoh, he says the Jews are coming to cover the earth, they're going to multiply too quickly, and they're going to take over. And so he hires a fellow enigmatic anti-Semitic prophet called Bilam to go and curse the Jews. And now it's interesting because Bilam in Jewish literature is described as the ultimate anti-Semite. The Midrash, the rabbinic literature, describes Bilam, this enigmatic prophet, as somebody with the potential as Moses. He could have been that great, yet he chose to use his powers for evil. The Talmud actually describes Bilam as one of Pharaoh's advisors. The Talmud says that when Pharaoh was wondering what to do with the Jews because they were multiplying too quickly, it was Bilam who raised his hand and had the great idea to throw the baby boys into the Nile, thus opening up the darkest chapter of the servitude in Egypt. Bilam was, if we can imagine, an anti-Semite par excellence. But there's an irony here, because it's Bilam's words, it's his praise of the Jewish people that make up some of the most beautiful, some of the most inspirational words of our tradition. Ma tovu ahalolecha Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael. How fair are your tents, Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel. The Jewish community is so beautiful, you can imagine Bilam saying. Our dwelling place, our community, as he's gazing in from the mountaintops looking at our community, he's uplifted and he's overcome by blessings. The fact that this is a community that has mutual respect from everyone to another. The Midrash describes the fact that the tents in the Israelite encampment was organized in the perfect manner so that nobody would be able to see into each other's tents, disrupting privacy, yet open in a way that any time somebody was hungry and needed a meal, always knew that they were invited. Other commentators say the matovu aholecha, the how good are your tents, that these tents are referencing the study halls, the fact that wherever Jews have been throughout history, we've brought with this idea, this tradition of seeking truth. How good is this nation, Bilam's saying, who spends their time studying and searching for truths? This truly, the Jewish community, is a nation with the ability to have civil debate and discourse, but yet remain one community. And so at the end of this week's Torah portion, we conclude with everything being perfect, and the praise and glory of the Jewish people is shining for the world to see. But of course, that's not what happens. And there's an irony that screams out at the end of this week's Torah portion, and something that was bothering me all week. At the same time that Bilam is cursing the Jews in the first 4 to 5 aliyot of this week's Torah portion, the Jews are preoccupied. And at the end of this week's Torah portion, at the beginning of Numbers 25, the Torah is telling us, at this exact moment, while Israel was staying in the town of Shittim, the nation profaned themselves by going after Moabite women and their gods. Imagine this. Well, the Torah is describing this anti-Semitic prophet, this anti-Semitic demagogue, describing how beautiful the Jewish community is and how incredible this nation is. The Jewish people were there in one of their darkest episodes of internally sinning, both against their fellow human and also against God. When the narrative oftentimes becomes too much about other people, when we spend our time too focused on what the Balaks and the Bilaks of the world thinks about us, whether for good or bad, it's so easy to forget that it's us, it's the people in the Jewish community who really do control our own destiny. When our narrative, when our communal narrative becomes too much about what others think of us, becomes too much about anti-Semitism, becomes too much about what the world thinks about us, our community, Jews, the state of Israel, it's so easy to use this as a convenient excuse to not worry about what's happening right here in our tents. This past week, I was on Facebook and I saw an advertisement for a Jewish summer learning program, which was the impetus for the inspiration of a lot of what I'm about to say. And it said in big, bold letters on Facebook, if you are Jewish, then somebody hates you. It's intrinsic to who you are, end quote. And at the bottom, there was a link to sign up for a summer Jewish learning program for teenagers. What a terrible framing. What an awful way to conceptualize Jewish community. What an awful way to try to inspire people to learn about their identity. Look at all those people who hate you. You might as well come learn more about your identity. And this week's Torah portion, with the blessings/cursings of Balak and Bilam, and the fact that internally in the Jewish community, there was a complete defect of worrying about what was happening internally, these two models of Jewish community can't be more stunning. So we get to the middle of one of Bilam's blessings, and this is an enigmatic verse that Jewish scholars have since debated for thousands of years. The verse goes as follows: "As I see them from the mountaintops, gaze on them from the heights, this is a nation of people that dwells apart, not reckoned among the nations." In one of the vague, enigmatic verses of Bilam's blessing/curse, he says that the Jewish nation is a nation that dwells apart. This has been the title of many political treaties throughout Jewish history. Yitzhak Rabin actually invoked this idea when he signed the Oslo Accords. He said, no longer will the Jewish nation be a nation who dwells apart. So this blessing/curse of Bilam has been very powerful. But see, there's two different ways to read this verse. What does it mean that the Jewish people are a nation that dwells apart? And it's here where it's not so clear if Bilam is blessing and cursing the Jews. Because what do you mean that we dwell apart? Are we a nation whose central defining feature is the fact that we're shunned? Is our central feature and is the motivating factor of the Jewish community, well, there's always people in the world that hate us, so we dwell apart, isn't that a shame? Or is there a positive way to read this? Can we cultivate a type of Jewish identity where our central defining characteristic isn't dependent on what others think of us, but the fact that we have a motivating ideal of holiness, of ethics, of serving God, that we separate ourselves out for a unique and special mission that uplifts both ourselves and the world around us? This is the question that Bilam gives us this week. Are we going to spend our time thinking and worried about Balak and Bilam? Or are we going to spend our time worrying about what's happening in our community? How do we make sure that Bilam's words of Matovu aren't just the empty praise of somebody thinking the Jews are up to something no good? How do we turn this blessing into a reality? I was thinking a couple weeks ago, at the beginning of Parsha Korach, so this is going back a couple of weeks ago, and one of the questions that Korach asks that oftentimes confuses a lot of people reading it is Korach's claim when he challenged Moses' leadership is he said, the entire nation is holy. And we discussed this a couple weeks ago, and the question is obvious. What's so wrong with Korach challenging Moses' leadership, trying to eradicate hierarchies, saying we're all holy? And the Israeli scholar Yeshayahu Leibowitz offers a fascinating read of this. And he says, well, if we go back to the previous Torah portion, the end of Parsha Shalach, at the end of Parsha Shalach, we get the third paragraph of Shema. And the third paragraph of Shema, as we read every Shabbat morning, says, if you follow the mitzvot, then you could be holy. And Yeshayahu Leibowitz says, well, the problem with what Korach was saying is he thinks that holiness is an inherent part of the Jewish people. But holiness is not inherent. Holiness is aspirational. And this dialectic, this challenge that Bilam is giving to us, is there something inherent within us, as this ad on Facebook says, that being intrinsic to who we are is the fact that people hate us, that we're separated this out? Or is there something that we're supposed to be aspiring towards? Is there an ideal, a set of ideas that we're supposed to cultivate in our community? And so the great challenge of this week's Torah portion is not to read Bilam's words and go home feeling good about ourselves because somebody thinks we're great, somebody thinks we're powerful. But what can we do to truly live up to the blessing of Bilam? Shabbat Shalom.
Are we on? Yep. Thank you for that transition, Evan. Shabbat Shalom. The Parsha Bamidbar Balak is on page 1173 in the Blue Book. Yam Tu, Feifel ben Shlomo, Halia Rishon, Felix Livitz, and reading will be Sarah Deland.
Baruch et Adonai Hamvorah.
Baruch Adonai Hamvrach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim Ve'natan Lanu et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
Ben Sipor et Kol Asher Asa Yisrael La'emori Vayagar Moav Mipnei Ham Me'od Ki Ravu Vayakatz Moav Mipnei Bnei Yisrael Vayomer Moav El Ziknei Midyan Ata Yilachachu HaKahal Et Kol Savivotenu Kilho Hashor Et Yerek HaSadeh Uvalak Ben Sipor Melech LeMoav Ba'et Ahi Vayishlach Malachim El Bilam Ben Beor Petorah Asher Al Hanahar Eretz Bnei Amo Likro Lo Lemor Hine Am Yatsa Mimitzrayim Hine Chisa Et Ein Haaretz Vehu Yoshev Mimuli.
Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Natan Lanu Torat Emet V'chayei Olam Nata B'tocheinu. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Yasher Koach. Amen. Yasher Koach. Yasher Koach. Okay. Yam Tu, Yekasil Gabriel Ben Baruch, Halevi Vitzirol Leah Nachuma, Leah Sheni, Steve Velasco, and reading will be Rabbi David.
Daniel.
Daniel Levine. I've been gone too long. Aye.
Baruch hu Adonai havarach.
Baruch Adonai Le'olam.
Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai havarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. Ve'ata lechena reliata am. Hazeh katzum hu mimeni ulai ucha nekabo ve'grashenu min haaretz. Ki yadati et asher tivrech mevrech ve'et asher te'or yu'ahar. V'lechu ziknei Moab ziknei Midyan v'kesamim bi'adaham v'yavo el Belam v'yedabru elav v'dabri balak v'yomer Elohem linu po halayla v'shivoti etchem davar kesher yidabar Adonai Eli v'yeshuvu sarei Moab im Bilam.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher natan lanu Torah emet. V'chayei olam notah b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. Yasher Koach. Yam Tu. We're Yam Tu. Mordechai Shalev. Ben Shimo Shlomo Miriam Hannah. Uvolvil Ben Yeshe Davida. Leah Hashlishi. Aiden Oslick and Zachary Richter, and reading will be Rabbi Daniel again.
I love it.
And we're on the second column on that same page, 1173, down about 7 lines.
Et Adonai hamborach.
Baruch
Adonai
Adonai
Baruch
Le'olam
Olam
va'ed.
Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamborach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol hamim. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. Vayavo Elohim el Bilam vayomer mi anashim ela imach. Vayomer Bilam el Elohim balach ben tzipor melech Moab shalach eli hinei ha'am yotzim mimitzrayim v'yachas es ayin haaretz ata alecha kevali oti ulai ochel lihelachem bo v'grashatav. Vayomer Elohim el Bilam lo tilachem mehem lo torat ha'am ki baruch hu.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher natan lanu Torah emet. V'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. Yasher koach.
Amen. Yasher Koach. Yam Tu. Title Rivka Bat Shmuel Vilea. Hamaftir. Lila Pesner. And doing our maftir will be Rabbi Miriam Van Roel. That is, I do not. You can find it there. I'll see if I can.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'eten lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. Vayah Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon haKohen vayakom mitoch ha'edah vayikach ramach biado vayavo achar ish Yisrael el hakubah vayakor et shnehem et ish Yisrael ve'et haisha el kovataha v'teatzor hamagefa me'al b'nei Yisrael v'ayu hametihim b'magefa arba'a v'esrihim aleph.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet V'haye olam data betochenu baruch ato Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Sure. We turn to page 370 for the Mishuberach for everybody who partook in the Torah service this morning. Mishuberach Avatenu v'Yamatenu Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov Sarah Rivka Bracha v'Leah Hu Yivarach et Kol Ha'olim Ba'avor Shaluch v'Namakom L'chvod HaTorah B'Skar Zeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yishmerehu v'Yatzilenu Mikol Tzara U'Tuka U'Mikol Nego U'Machla v'Yishlach Bracha v'Tzlacha B'Chol Masei Yadehem Im Kol Yisrael v'No Mahar. Amen. Before we recite the Mishuberach for healing, we take a moment and spend time thinking about anybody in our community in need of healing this Shabbat, be it physical, spiritual, mental healing. Please have them in mind for the Mishuberach. Mishuberach Avotenu v'Imotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah Hu Yivarach et Kol HaCholim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachamim Aleihem Lahachmil Lamam Ulefuatam Ulehachzikam V'Yishlach Lahem Mehera Refuah Shlema Min HaShamayim Refuat HaNefesh V'Refuat HaGuf Hashda B'Galav Zakari V'No Mahar. Amen. Please rise for the lifting of the Torah for Hagbah.
וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל על פי אדוני ליד משה. על שלושה דברים, על שלושה דברים, על שלושה דברים העולם עומד. על שלושה דברים, על שלושה דברים, על שלושה דברים העולם עומד. על התורה ועל העבודה ועל גמילות חסדים. על התורה ועל העבודה ועל גמילות חסדים. עץ חיים היא לי, למד חזיקים בה, ותומריה מאושר דרכיה, דרכי נועם, בכל נתיבותיה שלום. השיבנו אדוני אליך ונשובה, חדש ימינו כקדם.
Please remain standing for Alinu, page 586.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי ארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות אדמה, ולא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונה, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שנאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו
You may be seated.
We now turn our thoughts to those whose time Those we remember in our hearts, those we remember out loud. If you have the name of somebody whom you would like to remember, perhaps for the first week of mourning, Shiva period, Shloshim, the first year of mourning, or those you are observing a yahrzeit, I invite you to rise.
My wife lived in Alaska. My mother, Rita Silverstein, my cousin, Jim Collins.
Sarah. We also remember those whose yahrzeit is this week: Beverly Sains, Esther Rebecca Katz, Abraham Heimson, Stephen L. Schneider, Harold Solomon, Dorothy Eilberg, Marvin Schwartz, Sidel Jazz, Charlotte Abrams, Jacob Saranyi, Al Dubin, Eli Melser, Sylvia Kaufman, Michael Silberman, Lori Spielberg, Joshua Silverstein, and Eva Madonic. Though we don't mention by name as part of the Shiva period, we also turn our thoughts to the family of Joan Friedman. Joan passed away on the 13th and will be laid to rest this coming Monday. If it is your custom to rise to join those who mourn or to remember somebody whose name was not mentioned, I invite you to do so as we join together for the Kaddish on page 598. Yit Gadal v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah Be'alma Divra Chirute V'yamlich Malchute B'chayechon Uvyomechon Uvchaye Dechol Beit Yisrael Ba'agala Uvizman Kariv V'imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevorach Le'olam U'lalmei Almaya Yit Barach V'yishtabach V'yit Pa'ar V'yit Romam V'yit Naseh V'yit Hadar V'yit Aleh V'yit Halal Shmei Kudisha Brichu Le'elam Min Kol Birchata V'shirata Tush Bechata V'nechemata Da'amiran Be'alma V'imru Amen. Yehi Shlomo Rabbah Min Shmaya V'chayim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Osei Shalom B'imromav Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. May the one who sends peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved. And we say Amen. You may be seated. Announcements, Rabbi Daniel. Yes, go right ahead. What's going on in the world?
What's going on in the world is
All good things, right?
all good things. Well, Wednesday night we have the 4th session of our deep dive into Shabbat class. If anybody would like to join, it's been on Zoom at 6 p.m. So you can send an email to me or Temple Beth Tikvah, and we would love to give you the link. In terms of a little Jewish calendar knowledge here, Sunday is Shivasar B'Tammuz, which is a day that traditionally commemorates when the walls of Jerusalem were sieged before the destruction of the Second Temple. And so just so we have an overall awareness of the Jewish calendar, Sunday is Shivasar B'Tammuz. Traditionally, it's a day of mid-level mourning. Some people fast, some people refrain from other things like that, but just so we have in mind that Sunday begins a period known as the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av. And we conclude our Shabbat services with Adon Olam.
Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yetzir Nivra Le'ed Nasa B'chetzo Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Ve'acharei Kichlot HaKol Levado Yimloch Nora Ve'hu Haya Ve'hu Ove Ve'hu Yeh B'tzifara Ve'hu Yeh B'tzifara Ve'hu Echad Ve'en Sheni Lehamshilo Leachbira Beli Reshit Beli Tzachar התכלית, ולא העוז והמצרה, ולא העוז והמצרה, והוא אלי וחי גואלי, בצור חבלי בעת צרה, והוא ניסי ומנוס לי, מנת כוסי ביום אקרא, מנת כוסי ביום אקרא, בידו אפקיד רוחי, בעת תישן ואירה, ואם רוחי גביעתי, אדוני לי ולא יירא, אדוני לי ולא יירא.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Have a
A
good
wonderful,
week.
restful Shabbat.
Zoomers, if you want to stay around, I'll schmooze for a few minutes if you're interested. That was me.